I thought I was being punked by a friend, you know, really, honestly. And they said, look, we've much more eloquently than this, but we've stumbled upon your work and we've deemed it to be of significant value, both historically and culturally, to the nation. And with your permission, we'd like to archive it in perpetuity at the Library of Congress. That was huge. And I'll tell you why. When you do this type of work and people are kind enough to take time out and really bare their soul on camera, I mean, it's that kind of deep conversation. So they've been so honest and so open with me that I've always felt this unbearable weight of the world on my shoulders. This can't just sit on an obscure little website that maybe if you're a friend of mine on LinkedIn, you get to know about. But if you're not, it collects dust and it doesn't impact the world. And the moment I got that note, I no longer felt the weight of the world on my shoulders.
That just is one of the reasons why I'm so glad on LinkedIn I get to see people that it would have taken me Herculean efforts to have crossed their path otherwise.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, it's a really powerful platform. It really is.
It is. I mean, I remember when I got on it about 9 years ago, I was like, I'll just do this thing. I wonder if it's any use. And it's like the most amazing thing.
It really is. It really is. It gets people to, see what you do and kick the tires on whatever it is that you put out into the ether and vice versa. And people connect to it and they vibe to it. You start sort of amassing this group of like-minded individuals, right?
That's true. I even like it when they kick the tires and the tire goes flat and I have to fix it.
Well, yeah, I do too. I do too. As I've always said, I like to get bad news early, right? We're all human. We're not right about everything, and sometimes you think you've got it all figured out, and you realize, hey, I just bumped my head up against the side here, and that's okay. That's okay.
That's right. That's right. There's like
Yeah,
that variation of fail fast, right?
that's it. That's it. That's it. You don't want to fail as an old man for the first time. No, no, no. Right? You you want to get that grit and resilience built into you early on so that you can handle it when life throws you curveballs later on. Yeah.
Now that's an interesting twist. Now define for us, Tony, old man. Where are you going with that?
I'm referring to myself here, not to you, Gean. I'm referring to
No,
myself.
no, no.
You know.
I applied to myself. I'll be 57 this summer.
No, I'll take 57. I'll take 57 gladly. I just meant that as a joke. You do want to experience setbacks and you want to go through the trials and tribulations that it takes to sort of course correct and come out from under nonsense early on, right? That's why I've always said I love this immigrant community. For the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, they know what it's like to face adversity. They know what
Mhm.
it's like to take a leap of faith and leave everything behind and go out on this high wire act with no net. I'll give you an example, man. I live on this cool little tropical island in Florida. It's called Key Biscayne. It's part of Miami, but it's its own independent island, right? You got to come across a huge bridge, or you take your boat in and out. We're fortunate to live here. It's paradise. 2008, I guess, when the economy sort of hit the skids. I had friends of mine here going, "Oh my God, such a difficult situation. I'm yanking my hair out. What am I going to do?" I'm like, dude, I'll be honest with you. Look around. You got a beautiful house, you've got healthy kids, you've got a wonderful marriage, you've got a roof over your head, you've got two refrigerators full of food, because we both know you got an extra one in the garage. And you're worried about what, right? You're worried about what? My old man washed dishes during the day, cleaned the factory floor at night. We lived in a tiny little crappy apartment that we shared the bathroom with a drunk next door. And I don't ever remember my old man complaining. So, I'm not going to complain living in this slice of paradise and you're worried about what the stock market is doing. Come on. You know,
I don't even want to act like I'm contrary to what you were saying because I love that statement. Walt Disney said something to that effect, like it's good to have hardships in your youth, man.
correct, correct, correct. That's why I think, competitive sports is so important, right?
Hmm.
And learning how to work as a team and learning how to get beat real bad by someone who's a lot better, a team that's a lot better than you are, and everything that goes with it, right? Like you learn not to identify. That doesn't identify you. What
Right.
identifies you is your ability to overcome it. We all get punched in the mouth at one point or another. Do we stay on the ground whimpering, or do we get back up and do something about it? Whatever that is. So yeah, those are all great lessons when you're young. By the time you're old, there's no time to learn and react to it. By then, it becomes much more difficult, I would assume. To that point, I've got a wonderful anecdote if I could share it with you.
Please.
There was a gentleman in the radio industry. I'm not going to name him, but he was a bit of a big shot in the industry. At every cocktail party, people would flock around him. And then he retired, and I saw him probably 5-6 years after his retirement at a cocktail party. Hardly anybody was speaking to him because he was out of the industry, right? Being someone that's always enjoyed, life lessons and things that you can sort of learn from people that have more experience than you do, I walked over to him and I threw my arm around him. We had a conversation. He said, if I can give you a piece of advice, he said, I look at myself in the mirror now, Tone, and I don't recognize myself. But you know what? It's happened really, really quickly. So if I can give someone your age a piece of advice, it's whatever you hope to do in life, approach it with a sense of urgency. Before you know it, you're going to be staring at yourself in a mirror and wondering who the hell it is that's looking back. Isn't that powerful? It stayed with me for decades. I mean, as I tell you the story, I can see him at this cocktail party, sharing that piece of wisdom with me. And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right.
And Tony, I mean, everything you said basically harmonizes with what I have learned about you in my reading. You have had 3,000 stories recorded with your Immigrant Archive Project. I mean, if you did one every day, that's like almost 10 years straight of stories.
We've been at it for 15 years.
Yeah.
It has been an absolute obsession. It has snowballed into something that has consumed me to a certain degree, because it's been so rewarding.
That's how I crossed your path, and that's how I found you, because these stories, these snippets of your stories that would pop up on your LinkedIn feed, I just couldn't ignore them. I mean, I just read the first sentence and I had to read the whole thing.
So I was fortunate enough to have lived that immigrant experience. In my case, perhaps a little more accurately, the political refugee experience. We never came to the U.S. because we wanted a better job or because we couldn't afford to feed our families back in Cuba. We came to the U.S. because there was freedom here and it was non-existent on the island. I'll give you an idea, and I've shared this in the past, so perhaps some of your listeners, this won't be necessarily news, but it's something I think it's worth sharing with you. When I was a toddler, and just to put into context, I was born in 1962. So by then, Castro's government was in place for about 3 years. So things hadn't gotten quite as bad as they became eventually, but freedoms had completely eroded. And if we ever have the pleasure of having a drink or a cup of coffee together, you will no doubt take note of the fact that I've got the bow legs to prove the fact that I needed more calcium when I was a kid. The doctor said, look, the kid needs more milk than what you're getting through the current ration program. So you need to try to find a way to get him more milk. He needs more calcium. So my father did exactly what I believe you would do, certainly what I would do. He went to the black market and he purchased 2 liters of milk for a sick son. And for that, he was thrown in prison. Not for stealing 2 liters of milk. He never stuck a gun in anybody's ribs. He never walked out of a store with something under his jacket. And for that, he was thrown in prison. So that was our reality. So what we came here in search of was something, a little different than what most immigrants come looking for. I think the refugee experience and the immigrant experience are slightly different, but there are parallels that intersect throughout. And I wanted to tell the story in a very sort of broad context. So I didn't want to make it just about political refugees. I wanted to make it about immigrants overall. What really led me to the creation of this project was seeing how immigrants and everything related to immigration began to take a very xenophobic sort of tone, whether it was, the governor of Arizona at the time that was blaming immigrants for all kinds of things, bringing in diseases and stealing jobs. And as I was listening to this, I kept sort of playing my own life tape back, right? And I grew up in an immigrant community. All the kids on my block, except for one, there was one American girl named Dana. And Dana was known as La Americanita, the little American girl. Right? Nobody knew Dana's name except for us, right? And Dana would hang out with us and run around with us. And Dana learned to speak Spanish with everybody else, even though her parents were American. She was one of us, but everybody else was an immigrant kid. All of our parents, similar to my parents, were working factory jobs, blue collar jobs, but they were wonderful people, man. They kept their eyes on the kids. So we were raised by our parents and everybody else's parents. God forbid they caught a young teenage kid smoking, they'd grab you by the ear and drag you to your father in a heartbeat. It was a
Mhm.
different sort of experience. And I remember collectively the advice that we would all hear. And it was almost as if our parents had huddled up at one point and agreed, this is what we got to do, right? They kept hammering into all of us the importance of education. You need to get an education. Don't worry about how we're going to pay for it. I will have the money when the time comes. And I rewind that tape, and I'll be damned if every single kid on that block, maybe the exception of 2 or 3, all went on to get college degrees. In my family's case, I was the first. I've got a sister who's 6 years younger. She followed me, and she took it a little further. She went on and got a law degree from Fordham, went on to become an assistant dean at the Stern Business School. My father will tell you the first time he stepped into a 4th grade class was to visit with one of my teachers at a PTA meeting, right? He'd never been inside a 4th grade class. His education ended in the 3rd grade. So how do you have a guy with a 3rd grade education, no language skills, and manages to have a daughter who becomes assistant dean at Stern Business School, right? How does he
Mhm.
manage to have a son with a successful career in the broadcast industry? How does he manage to work his way now that he's a happily old retired guy living literally, and I don't say this to brag, man, but it's props to the old man, living in a penthouse apartment a block from the beach on a tropical island, right? And it wasn't done by making a fortune. It was done by playing tremendous defense when it came to his spending and round the clock offense, trying to make as much money as he could honestly and through hard work and a lot of determination and grit, and not calling in sick when he had a fever and showing up to work on a snowy day with 102 fever and doing
Wow.
that day in and day out and day in and day out since he arrived in the United States on November 17th of 1967. So it just felt to me so unfair to villainize a community that I think we should all be very, very appreciative of, because
Mhm.
collectively what we bring to the country just honestly just can't be valued. And after collecting thousands of these stories, I can tell you unequivocally, there is no more quintessentially American story than the story of an immigrant. Simply put, there's a huge difference when you're American by choice versus American by good fortune. I had the opportunity during the pandemic to partake on this online panel, right? Everything was done via Zoom, right? There were no more conferences. So we had all these get-togethers electronically. And another panelist was Lucy Arnaz, the daughter of
Yes.
Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz.
Mhm.
At one point, I had to interject and just tell her how incredibly impressed I've always been by her father's genius. He was the guy that invented the 3-camera shoot. He was the guy who we can trace back this whole syndication business and the fact that artists can go on to become exceptionally wealthy years after they punched out and they delivered their lines on a successful TV show. They can continue to collect residuals. He was the one that said, hey, let's shoot I Love Lucy on film so that we can own this content. Nobody had ever done that before. And they said, no, that's too expensive. That's crazy. Who's going to want to see the show again? He said, okay, you know what? Let me have the rights to the show, to any future airings, and I'll pay for the filming. They thought he was nuts. And it revolutionized the TV industry. She very kindly let me finish. And she said, I appreciate what you're saying, but I've got to tell you, my father was no genius. You're absolutely wrong about my dad. I'll tell you what enabled him to do that. The fact that he was a Cuban refugee and he'd been through so much adversity made him fearless. So when the average person may think twice about bringing this, what to other people might be a cockamamie idea, to the head of CBS, he was okay. What could the head of CBS say? You're an idiot. It's a stupid idea. I've been through a lot worse in my life. I got no problem hearing I'm an idiot, right? So there was no filter there. And so often we sort of play by what we believe the rules are. We don't want to come across as being silly. We don't want to come across as being the one that tables a stupid idea. So many of us keep what otherwise may be wonderful ideas off the table. And that immigrant experience makes you fearless. It's okay. You'll throw it out there.
That makes me honorary immigrant then, because I don't care. I want to do it.
There you go. There you go. There you go. It's invaluable to have that. It really is.
You know, it's so funny that you said that, because just by chance today I came across an I Love Lucy clip on the internet, and it was just by chance. It had me cracking up because, like you said, his timing was so perfect. It was just like Desi was sitting next to Lucy, and she was getting this gossipy phone call, and she said to the person she was talking to, they didn't, they didn't, they didn't. And then she goes, they couldn't. And then Desi interrupted, maybe they couldn't because they didn't. You know?
Oh, it was timeless. It was timeless.
Oh man, I laughed out loud. I'm like, I know that he wrote that, you know, just because the way he did it, it was just
Right.
like so funny. And this was like, what is it, 70 years ago? I was just like, that is priceless. So,
You know, and nobody wanted them to do the show together, right?
right.
I mean, you know, the heads of the studio were like, yeah, well, you know, we love this I Love Lucy thing, and we're going to cast so-and-so as your husband. Like, America doesn't want to see you married to a Cuban guy, you know? And it's not that long ago when you think about it, right? It's not like it's hundreds of years ago. It certainly happened within my father's lifetime. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Just that point that you just made right there, you know, I think that's the precious thing that we can take from the immigrant experience. It's just like, go for it, try it out, test it out, be fearless.
Yeah. Well, again, let's analyze this, right? Why are immigrants starting businesses at a faster clip than the native born?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not like they come here with tremendous business acumen. In some cases, they do, but not the overwhelming majority of immigrants. If you had great business acumen, you can continue doing business in your home country, right? You don't need to say goodbye to your culture and your food and everything that you know to go to a country with no contacts, no language skills, and start fresh. So there's something to that experience. You know, you're not afraid.
To that point, like the interview that you reposted and a clip of Lisette Landa, I was just stunned because she looks like she could be like an actress or something. And then I read it, and she's a correction officer, and she said criminals behind bars, and they complained to her, and she said, look, I had the worst childhood and I had less things than you.
And she really did. And she really did. I mean, I put up just a brief little excerpt from her story. She just has gone through so much. And I don't want to bore you with the details, but she really had a really, really rough upbringing. And she told me, she said, the first time I sort of felt respected was when I became a corrections officer and I worked in a world surrounded by, quote unquote, the worst of society. I felt the safest there. I really did. And that just really, really, really hit me hard. Yeah. Yeah. Just a remarkable woman.
Yeah, you capture some jewels. You know, before I talked to you today, I looked at the video clip on your site of your conversation with Edward James Olmos.
Yeah.
And, you know, he said to you, you cannot understand a culture without seeing its art form. And I'm like, correct. Oh my goodness.
That is so true. Our art form really isn't reflective of who we are as a community. And not just of Latinos, but African Americans and, you know, Native Americans and women and so many. Yeah. And it's a shame. So that's why I think projects like this are important. I think it's important to give people who otherwise can't share their stories a platform to do that. And again, going back to my childhood for a second, if I could, what I wanted to do was give the average Joe access to those dinner table conversations, because it was important for, you know, my parents' generation to not lose the essence of who we are in a new country. I remember, I mean, they were militant about it. You stepped foot into our apartment at 2610 New York Avenue in Union City, New Jersey, and you could not speak English. English was not allowed inside our apartment. I remember my father used to always say, could you imagine your grandmother not being able to speak to her grandchildren because you knuckleheads can't speak Spanish? Not on my watch. And my sister and I used to rebel sometimes, but you know what? It was a benevolent dictatorship. It was not a democracy in that apartment. And thankfully, we can both speak and write and read in Spanish, even though we were never educated formally in the language.
Wow.
I think that's important. I think that's important. They always spoke about what life was like in Cuba before. And we were taught to appreciate our customs, right? Everybody
Mm-hmm.
else opened their Christmas presents the 25th, the morning of Christmas. We opened our presents midnight on the 24th. And the big
Mm-hmm.
celebration was Nochebuena. The big celebration was never the 25th. It was Nochebuena, just the way it was handled in Cuba. My wife, who's Irish American, my wife and I, we celebrate both. So my kids sort of grew up with the best of both worlds, right? They'd open half their presents on the 24th in the evening and then the other half on the 25th. One of the interviews I conducted in the project early on was with each of my daughters. And Sarah, who's not my middle daughter, who's 25, she was, I don't know, maybe 12. And she said, the best part of this bicultural sort of existence is that you're not 50% Cuban and 50% American. You're 100% Cuban and 100% American. So we get to be
Wow.
200%. How cool is that? And she was right.
Oh man, that reminds me of Steve Jobs. He was adopted and he was like maybe 9 or 10 years old, and some girl across the street taunted him playing outside, and he ran inside and was crying to his adoptive parents and said, she said I was adopted. I think he knew, but he just didn't want it to be called out. His parents said, similar to your daughter viewing it like that, his parents said, you weren't adopted, you were chosen.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Man, the power of the right words at the right time, right? Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You've got these right words at the right time. And all the pictures I see you're doing the camera work. And I guess you're asking the questions, but how are you getting these right words at the right time? Are you just editing like crazy, or are you like coaxing it out?
No, I never coax it out. No. I've only interjected myself in less than a handful of interviews. And again, we've done, north of 3,000
Yeah.
interviews,
Yeah.
right? Over 3,000 hours of content. And I've only interjected myself a handful of times. One of the most memorable interviews, I interviewed this young lady who turned 108 years of age the week after we sat down to talk.
What?
And during the interview, she made mention, all of her children had died of old age. And she mentioned that her younger sister in Puerto Rico, blah, 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 blah. So I let her finish. And I'm like, okay, hang on a second. You got a younger sister in Puerto Rico? Said, yeah. I'm like, how old's your younger sister? She goes, oh, let's see. My kid sister, she'd be about 104 right now. I said, look, I got to be honest with you. I need to talk to your sister. She was like, yeah, sure. I'll set that up for you. And we never managed to put it together. I said, because I can only imagine she's the only 104-year-old with an older sister. And she laughed and she laughed. She goes, I think you're right. I don't coax any answers. I'm genuinely interested in their lives. I always prepare. I have pages and pages of questions for each of these interviews. I have the questions in my lap, and I never look at the questions once. I only go through that process so that I know that I'm prepared, but then I let them take me on their journey. So based on whatever they share with me, I follow up the questions as if, I shouldn't say as if, because I'm the listener at that point, right? So whatever I'm interested in knowing more about, more often than not, it's what you as the listener would be interested in hearing. So I'm asking those questions for you. But here's the thing, over the course of this project, I can't tell you how many times, once these interviews are over, I'll get the exact same question. And the question is this: Tony, can you send me a full copy of this conversation? and by now I know why they're asking, but I play stupid. And I'm like, yeah, be happy to, but why? And 99.9% of the times they tell me, because I've shared anecdotes and stories with you that I've never shared with my wife or with my husband or with my kids. We go to places during these cathartic conversations that we normally don't go to in our busy lives. And you dig deep, and oftentimes people will cry on camera. You alluded to the Eddie Olmos interview a while ago. We had a press conference in LA. This major sponsor was announcing that they were sponsoring the project. And They asked Eddie Olmos to come out and say a few words since I had interviewed him. And he started out by saying, I don't know how it is that this guy does it. He makes everybody cry, including me. And he started laughing. So you often even get people like Eddie Olmos to cry on camera because you take them to places that, again, you don't normally visit. And I think therein sort of lies the beauty of it.
That dovetails into that Jose.
Oh, man. That interview haunted me for weeks and weeks, and aspects of it still do today. And that interview was conducted over a decade ago.
Yeah.
You know, you know.
And I was so appreciative to read that because all the accolades he had, I said, whoa, this dude paved the way for so many people. And yet I didn't even know him.
This guy was everything that you see on that page magnified infinitely. He was cooler than the other side of the pillow. I remember, he had a moment of stardom where he was selling out the biggest stages all around the world, never sung in English, right? He only sung in Spanish. And he
Wow.
just had this smooth voice. Interestingly enough, by the way, just a brief aside, I happen to be very close friends with a gentleman named Elliot Wiseman. We had this really remarkable, crazy friendship. Elliot Wiseman's in his late 80s. We get along like we're brothers. And Elliot managed Frank Sinatra over the course of 3 decades.
Whoa.
And and he managed Liza Minnelli and Ben Vereen and Stephen Eady Gourmet and Don Rickles and Sammy Davis Jr., you name it. He was like the talent manager at the time. One time we bring up Jose, and he tells me how Sinatra was in awe of his talent.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't said that about many people, so
Right.
that was the power of Jose. And then all of a sudden, at the height of his stardom, he just sort of disappeared and nobody knew where he was. So during the conversation, I asked him where he was, and he answered very honestly. I think I shared some of that from the transcripts. I translated it to English, but it was a very, very dark space. And thankfully, he was fortunate to meet the perfect woman at the right time in his life, and she rescued him. She really rescued him. But by then, his voice had been so damaged, he literally lost that gift that he had received from the heavens. But he was alive to live out the rest of his life, so it was a blessing.
I gained even greater appreciation for you reading that because a lot of American media, if someone falls down on their luck, there's the post like, where are they now?
Yeah. But again, that's not what defines you, right? It's not the falling down that defines you. It's what you do with it. He told me his friends and family paid for him to go to Hazleton. They took him on a private plane and they dropped him off in this limo on the way from the airport to the clinic. He said, literally, this is how sick I was. I had a bottle of tequila under my jacket. And along the way, I kept making mental notes of where all the liquor stores were. So that when I got out, I knew exactly where to go and get more tequila. I drank the rest of the bottle and I threw it in the garbage can, and then I walked in. And then once I had gone through that detox and horrific stages of getting clean, the first thing they do is they play that video because they're videotaping it the entire time. And I could see myself walking up thinking I'm slicker than these people are. I'm having the last swig of tequila, and they've got it all. They've got it all on tape. And I was just embarrassed to see it. Yeah. Pretty heavy.
That is such humility, though. I mean, I just, you could tell he came. Well, I don't want to address like how he was before personality wise because I don't know, but he came through everything as a very humble person.
He did, and he was a humble person from the very beginning. His problem was that he did not choose his parents very carefully, and his father, unfortunately, was also an artist and had a huge problem with alcoholism.
That is something else. I appreciate your understanding how you explain that because it helps you have a lot of sympathy and empathy.
Yeah, it does, man. And I think you hit upon a really key word for me. That's empathy. In our society that rewards success, maybe success is the wrong word, the accumulation of wealth at any cost, we've lost a lot of that, I think. When you see a sitting American president make fun of a journalist with a handicap and people cheer rather than cringe, I think that's a sad statement on where we are as a society in America.
Yep.
So yeah, if this work allows people to tap into what little empathy is left, I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself to be an empathetic person, but I felt more empathy reading your stories, especially with what I don't know.
Right. Correct.
You're having a multi-pronged approach, or you're offering multi-pronged solutions to the planet, Tony.
I don't know about that, but those are very kind words. Thank you.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, because there's a lot of people out there that are amazing. They're getting into their later years. They have ideas, they want to do things, and they're setting about doing them. And many times they come across, well, I don't have the funds. If I had more money, maybe I'd take this more seriously. And then I look at what you're doing, and then I see how you talk about the opportunity for people to contribute and support what you're doing.
Right.
And then you have your donate buttons. It seems like that doesn't matter to you, about that you just do it as you go. Am I getting the right thing, that you don't let yourself be paralyzed by the status quo?
You're absolutely right. I mean, if I looked at this as I will only record stories if I have some funding to go and do it, I would have never recorded thousands of stories.
Mm-hmm.
We've never raised the money that you would think you'd need to record these thousands of stories. I've been fortunate that my day job has allowed me the luxury of a lot of these things. And I've decided to pass on other things that maybe other people would think it's more reasonable to use their funds against, and I put it towards this. But what I've gotten in return has been many, many times greater than whatever I put into it financially.
Wow. I love that, because I just listened. I said, it's so polished. It's so professional. And I know there's a lot of money that goes into it, but I don't see Tony as the guy who says, oh, I'm not going to do it unless I got this X amount.
No. And you know what? Luckily I've got people that, are a part of this, right? I mean, you can't do this by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier I was, manning the cameras. You may have seen a photo of me behind the camera, but I don't man the cameras. I've got a director of photography that's been sort of tied at the hip with me for many, 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 many years. And he's got an absolutely wonderful eye. He's just an absolute beast. He's got more Emmy awards than anyone I know. I've got an editor and producer that I started to work with early in her career, and we can finish each other's sentences. And she knows how I like things to sort of be pieced together. And in the editing, she really, really brings an A game that I'll put up against anybody's. And then over the years, when we first started out, the first maybe dozen or so stories were recorded on a handheld digital audio recorder. That's it. Right? It's me and the guests sitting at their dining room table, and there's this little, I don't know, maybe $50 recorder that I set up in the middle of the table, and we talk. And what I realized was that it was a lot more powerful than anything I had envisioned. So, okay, so let's go out and let's buy some video equipment. Regular video equipment turned into a little better video equipment. And right now, everything we shoot, if you know anything about production equipment, we shoot on Red. And to put it into context, it's the same cameras that Marvel Studios shoots their Spider-Man films on.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I'll show up in an SUV with camera equipment that arguably costs more than the subject's home to shoot their story, but it's available to us in a quality that 50 years from now, you'll be able to look at and be proud of the work, right? It's still ahead of the current broadcast quality norm. It shoots in 4K and above. I mean, I can shoot in 8K, but I choose not to because it would just take up too much space. But everything we shoot in 4K. We like professionally. It's professionally mic'd. I mean, any one of these interviews I can put on Netflix tomorrow with no problem.
That's right.
And the average Joe would think, you're out of your mind. Why would you spend so much money on all this equipment to get some farm worker story? But for me, it's not just some farm worker story, man. It's remarkable. It's the essence of who we are. It's our shared humanity. It's pushing back against all the nonsense that's just sheer nonsense.
Right. I want to pause and go into a corner and sit and think right at this moment. That reminded me all that lead up into the visionary aspect of things that you're doing, because you are thinking 50 years down the road. You talked about 50 years down the road, the video would be still top notch, but you're
Correct.
thinking like you're thinking 2073.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wish there was a project like this when I first arrived in 1967, right? I wish I
Mm-hmm.
could record my family story, their perspective, the way they viewed life back in 1967. Nobody was doing that back then.
Mm-hmm.
And that I know of nobody else is doing that today. I think it will become exponentially more valuable. And it was my view of this type of work from the very beginning, and that's why I've been so damn passionate about it. And then it was confirmed to me, interestingly enough, I want to say about a year or two ago, I received an email from the U.S. Library of Congress. For a, for a moment, man, I got to be honest with you, I thought I was being punked by a friend, you know, really, honestly. And they said, look, we've much more eloquently than this, but we stumbled upon your work and we've deemed it to be of significant value, both historically and culturally, to the nation. And with your
Mm-hmm.
permission, we'd like to archive it in perpetuity at the Library of Congress. That was huge. And I'll tell you why. When you do this type of work and people are kind enough to take time out and really bare their soul on camera, I mean, it's that kind of deep conversation. So they've been so honest and so open with me that I've always felt this unbearable weight of the world on my shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
that something important needs to be done with this work. This can't just sit on an obscure little website that maybe if you're a friend of mine on LinkedIn, you get to know about. But if you're not, it collects dust and doesn't impact the world. And the moment I got that note, I no longer felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. We got it across the finish line. Even if I don't shoot another story, it will live on and it will touch many, many people. And my children's grandchildren will be able to go in there one day and see it. It's a certain feeling of accomplishment.
That's beautiful. I had that in my notes too. The Library of Congress, I saw that. I like the way that you helped illuminate what that really meant. And, it just drives home the point like, we as a community want to support this. So, like, is the best way to go to your donate button, on the Immigrant Archive Project.org site? Is that the best way?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's a way, right? Perfect strangers donate, lunch money or donate thousands of dollars to the project. I've also worked with a number of leading brands that have leaned in to really, really help shine a light on what we do. McDonald's and General Motors and Farmers Insurance and really have taken a vested interest in the project and have helped us move it forward. So it's a combination of all of those things. It really is.
Hmm. Every helping hand is really a blessing when you have someone like you who's dedicated and devoted to this. So I told you I wasn't going to take your whole day, but as we are like, I would like to, but as we're like rounding out that immigrant spirit, Tony, you said it so well. I mean, what would you leave to the person who is sitting here listening to this up until this point and really impressed with your go after it attitude, your desire to leave this legacy and to help the world? What do you leave to that person? Maybe they're 14, maybe they're 29, maybe they're 45, and they're thinking about doing something significant to contribute.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think it's important to find something that you're passionate about that is bigger than you. I don't think it's enough that we go out and we work hard and we accumulate wealth and we try to live very comfortably and we wake up on satin sheets. I think that's wonderful, but I think there's more to our limited time on the planet. And the sooner you can find that which you're passionate about and is bigger than you, has got nothing to do with you, right? There's a reason why I'm not on camera. There's a reason why when you go on the project, unless it's a podcast, you never even hear my voice. It's not about me. I've never even shared my story in the project. Again, it's not about me. So find something that's not about you, that you're passionate about, that drives you. Give back. Give back. It's so important. Whether it was the United States government opening their doors to us when Our own government was incarcerating us for nonsense, whether it was people who spoke a different language and ate different foods and could have easily looked down at us and didn't, and offered us a hand and welcomed us into their inner circle. That's important. You wind up getting so much more than you give when you're that person. I was asked to deliver a commencement address at my alma mater some years back. And one of the things I shared with the students, I said, look, more than likely, you're all going to go on to have a very similar existence, right? You're all college educated kids. You're going to have decent white collar jobs. You're going to more than likely belong to country clubs where you're surrounded by educated people that think and look at the world the same way you do. My advice to you is to go out beyond that circle, befriend people that don't look like you and speak differently than you. What you will learn from them will be so much more valuable. With all due respect to our chancellor and all the esteemed professors, it'll be so much more valuable than what you've learned here over the last 4 years. It really will be. Trust me on that. It will be. Don't pigeonhole yourself. It's a big, beautiful, magical world. And keep yourself open to opportunities and blessings that come from folks who look at the world a little bit differently than you do. And I think that's where we begin to grow.
Wow. Well, like I say sometimes on these podcasts, I think this is probably my like 13th or 14th that I've done only, but it's like I know when it's a good time to end. That cannot be topped.
Well, thank you. And listen, I wish you all the luck in the world with your podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tony. I mean, it's a labor of love, but it's like you help me self-reflect, because part of the reason that I do it is because I like learning from people and I want other people to see these people close up.
Well, listen, I am honored. Really, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you again for the opportunity.